When scratchers have to do with the rhythm, you got a few members and then they got tools to put tools out there. Rhythm and then lyrics. That's how scratch was trying to play. Rhythm from the metal, lyrics from the strings. That's right. Play on with the music. Play on. Won't you play on with the music? Play on. There's a galaxy burning down where I roam. Everywhere I get you ready.
We just saw something about record production, and I'm going to turn the table over right now to Phil Fearon, the first one. He didn't know it, but he's looks prepared there. So,
right, we're talking about production. It's not really about production, my business, because in my experience, I had to become an everything man to make it work. I wasn't really a producer at first. I was just sort of a songwriter bumming around trying to make a living, as is most cases. So since we're talking about black music especially, there's a few problems and a few advantages that are unique to black music that I suppose most people won't know yet, but they are going to learn. Assuming everyone in here is trying to learn about or get into black music as a profession, they're going to have the same problems I had. Because as I talk to people like Junior or Dave Grant or Jackie Graham, who had problems like me, it's amazing the similarity. We've all been through exactly the same thing. So if what I'm saying sounds a bit vague, it'll make sense as you suffer. It's true. Before we get on to the actual production, the actual making of the record, I think it's more useful to point out how to get in a position where you can produce records. Because if I started talking about production techniques, about going to the studio and live rooms and dead rooms and reverberations, half of you in here will know what I'm talking about. And you probably never get to that stage anyway where you know what it's all about. So to become a producer, first you've got to get in a position where you can produce records. And getting your foot in that door is like almost impossible. Let's assume you can learn how to play guitar from a school. You can learn all these things. But once you've actually decided you want to make a record, these days you can get there's 4-track and 8-track studios that are very well equipped. You can buy DX7s, which is a fairly cheap but very, very good sounding synthesizer. You can buy a Roland 707 drum machine, which is very cheap and sounds excellent. So making demos these days, you can do it fairly cheaply. Go for the feel before the technical bits and pieces. It feels right, that doesn't matter. The way I had to do it was, and where do I start? It's difficult to say, we were talking about productions, it's difficult to say how to produce a record, because everyone's going to have their own individual way of doing it. So I can't say you start with the drums and then you just doesn't work that way. Everyone's got their own style. So talking about how to produce is difficult. All I can tell you about is my experiences and the games I had to play to get into the business. First game. To make a record, you need money. And every musician gets stuck in the same problem. They can't afford to book, unless you've got vast resources, which most people ain't got. Here's what I done, which some people may find useful. First of all, I had a little experience from Candidate as to how much money is not made in the business and where it all goes. And I realised that I couldn't keep living on my mother and father's income forever, which is what I was doing, even the Candidate days, prancing around on top of the pops and people think I'm a millionaire, and you're going on and signing on. Most hit records, most hit pop records, is no accident. They're all very, very carefully planned. And if you actually take your favourite 10 records and analyse each one and draw a chart, you'll see a similarity. It doesn't mean you're going to copy that. What happens is because of your own individuality, you put your own style into it and come out with your own sound. But I found that very, very useful as a songwriter, listening to other people who've had big hits. And you can't help but copying to some degree, but eventually you develop your own style. Once you've got the song, as far as making the demos go, you've got a choice of two things. You can either book a 4-track or an 8-track studio. Forget 24 tracks for now, because that's actually getting silly money. But if you're going well prepared, you can spend maybe £300 and come out with a very, very good demo. Never attempt more than 3 or 4. But what I would suggest, if there's about 4 or 5 people involved, if you work in the band, is forget going to a studio. Because what will happen is you make a demo, and because the business is so tough, and because it takes an element of luck as well, you may spend £300 on one demo. Companies say not bad. Another £300 another demo, and by the end of the year you spend maybe £1,000 of money you can't afford making demos that are going to sit on the shelf. So what I would suggest, if you can afford it, is for 3 or 4 of you to chip in if you get on headwise. That's another important thing, and get a 4-track machine or an 8-track machine. Even if it means taking out the odd loan here and there, you're borrowing off brothers and sisters and mother and father. I think it pays off, dividends in the long run. And then you can take your time over demos. If you think you need a remix here or a re-edit here, you can try again, and you're not sort of pressured watching the clock all the time. And because you can make such high-class demos these days because of new equipment, you can bring excellent demos to companies and that are well produced and display the song and your production ability and the artist ability as well. What we had to do for my company, I had spent about £2,000 of borrowed money sneaking into studios at midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning, paying the engineer backhanders to let me in. This is how I learnt my production techniques. I was no producer at all. After about a year of that, I put myself in serious financial problems. I was, my daddy was beginning to say, look, Phil, you're a grown man now. You have responsibilities about this music business. Do you think you're wasting your time? So I'm sure some people heard that before. And it's getting to the point where I became so desperate, I had to make a choice. Do I want to be a record producer or take a sensible job? And I made it, this just proves the dedication you need. And this is quite serious. I said to myself, I will become in the music business or become a tramp, one or the other. So having said that, I made that commitment. I sold everything I had to sell, and we got an access loan out. I bought a very cheap 16-track machine. And this may not work for everyone, but this is my routine, which I seriously recommend to people. I bought a very, very cheap machine and sat indoors and made tracks upon tracks upon tracks. And we had to borrow some money, but the gamble being this: if you go to a record company, they accept what you do, they will pay you X amount of money to make the record. Or they'll send you into their own studio and say, well, you have £10,000 of studio time here, which isn't really any money. This is very important, because all they're doing is signing papers from one department to another. But at the end of the day, if you sell, you owe them £10,000. And there's a friend of mine now who's made an album, and he's in debt of £100,000, and which means he almost doesn't want to have a hit, because if he sells $1 million, he's still broke. And the only people making money is the actual company. So there's a book I read a couple of years ago called How to Succeed in the Music Business, which I lent a fellow musician, and they stole from me. So I can't remember who the publisher was, but if you can get hold of that book, it is a very, very, very good book to read. I made this calculation that I was going to spend about £2,000 of borrowed money anyway and put myself in big trouble by the end of the year, because that's about how much it's costing to make demos and having no success whatsoever. So check this out for a business calculation. Rather than blow the money like that, I thought if we get a cheap studio, which you can get for maybe £3,000 of more borrowed money, take out an access loan or sell your car or something, and you put together a studio, you now have maybe a year of unlimited studio time. And if it all falls flat on its face, you can sell the equipment and get some change back. And the other way is, this is assuming you have a room to use. This is assuming I was lucky my dad let me take one more liberty with a house. But the other way is you end up with a pile of tapes and a lot of hopes and a lot of disappointment that you can't sell for peanuts. And this is the problem. I saw this happening, and I suggested the project to many, many musicians. All the black bands I knew at the time, I said, you're producing records at vast expense. Why don't we build a small studio in my house, and we'll take turns, and we'll have double the time. Okay, and I actually got laughed at. It was quite funny. I got laughed at because they said, you can't make serious records in your bedroom. I said, but you can make records in the toilet if you know what you're doing. And I got laughed out of the room. And I mean, subsequently, I've had great pleasure in inviting them round and saying, you were offered a share in this, ha ha. So it's quite funny. But what you do is, and what we done, we tried out company after company, had no success. They said the productions weren't good enough, go back and do it again. And like myself, I didn't know how to produce. I just kept trying out different ideas, listening to Quincy, listening to Chic, and trying out different ideas. And eventually, we got a deal. And the deal, as it is always in the business, was very, very, very small. No advance worth talking about. Basically, I'm taking all the risks, and if it works, they'll make all the money, which is another classic case, especially in black music. But fortunately, because I had the recording equipment available, I could record a song, and when they accepted it, charge them the studio time, instead of it going to another studio. And with that studio time money, reinvest back into buying more equipment. And by doing that, which isn't strictly music, it's a bit of a game within the music business that I think people don't put enough importance on. Everyone's talking about learn to play properly, learn to sing properly, learning how to get the right reverb sound and the right drum sound. And I think that's quite useless, because you can't learn that until you're actually in the studio and trying out things for yourself. The records I've had the most success with are the ones that I've played down the clever gadgetry and the scratching and the flanging or all the clever stuff, because I don't think that lasts. If you understand like the current trends of body popping and scratching and stuff, if you understand it, you can probably make a good living out of it. If you don't understand it, you're better off going for the song value, because the song, when you're making a record, a good song will come back year after year after year. But a trend record, which is currently what's happening, a lot of them making trend records with, reverse delays and reverse echoes and all kind of clever stuff, which I think, to me, is a bit bad. I think it's actually, we're losing music. In the last year or so, I think music has actually gone downhill. It's been nothing but effects and production techniques. So, speaking as a producer, I would actually play down the production for future projects and play up the song.
So now I want to go to something that Phil actually talked about a bit. He talked about getting it on the radio. And right now I'm going to turn the table over to the man who's the head of music at Capital Radio, Tony Hale.
I'm talking about radio production. And I have to make the difference here that I'm not talking about black music in radio production, because quite simply there aren't enough radio stations. Quite simply, in this country, and this is not the fault of any individual who runs or owns or works in a radio station, but because of Home Office legislation, there is very little radio available. Those of you who've been lucky enough to travel to New York will know that as soon as you get off the plane, you've got the choice of somewhere between 36 and 45 radio stations. If you want to hear doo-wop music, that's 4 or 5 guys standing in a tube subway or something, singing a cappella, unaccompanied. There is a radio station that plays that. Nothing else. Just doo-wop records from about 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. You want to hear jazz, you've got the choice of whether you want to hear a kind of fusion type of jazz with some funk in it, or whether you want just the birth of the cool modern jazz, or whether you want New Orleans traditional jazz. That's how much and pop, obviously there are 5 or 6 different types of radio stations. That's how much radio there is in America. In London, what you've got is the basic Radio 1, Radio 2, part of the national networks, the pop music networks. Radio 3, which so far as I can tell is designed as their own radio station for BBC management. Radio 4, excellent speech and drama facility. BBC Radio London. Capital Radio, which is described as a general and entertainment service. We think of it as a music radio station. LBC, which again is a news, current affairs and sports station. And legally, that's where you stop. Now, the reason that so many soul pirates have risen in the London area is quite simply because there's a call for that kind of music, which cannot be satisfied, with the best intentions, cannot be satisfied by the people who have the legal job of providing radio. Simply with whatever I said, 8 or 9 radio stations, there's not enough to be able to satisfy everybody's desires. That's why, for the person who was going to put down on their question, why the hell don't you play more black music on Capital? That is quite simply the answer. Because we have, statutorily, by law, to be all things to all people. We cannot just be a black music radio station any more than we can just be a white rock station or a reggae station or a folk music station or a country and western station or a doo-wop station or a sports station. We are governed by what the regulations say, and we have to try to please all the people all the time. Now I know, before anybody points it out to me, I know that the difficulty there is that sometimes you run the risk, a very grave risk, of pleasing none of the people any of the time. But that's what we have to put up with. So in what I say about radio production now, I'd like you to bear with me in that I can't talk about black music radio production because such an animal doesn't legally exist. As far as the pirates are concerned, obviously I can't answer for them. We have to try to represent all forms of music, 168 hours a week, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And every week, along with Phil's record, excellent as it is, along with Orin's records, brilliant as they are, there's also some dross that comes out. Somewhere between 90 and 150 singles came out this week. They all get listened to, but you can only, with the best will in the world, we pick 5 at Capital that we call climbers, that we think are worth a lot of attention, and then we add on between 8 and 12 other records for general daytime play. So we're talking about, in a low week, maybe 13 new records, and in a high week, maybe 22 new records out of a possible 150. That means every week of the year, every year, most people, by definition, are disappointed in terms of radio representation. So how do we choose them? Why choose one record and not yours? Why choose his and not his, or his and not his? There have to be reasons, I promise you, that we don't just throw them up in the air. And we certainly, at Capital at any rate, don't program on the basis of the plugger being white. It doesn't matter what the plugger tries to do. What we actually try to do at Capital, whether the plugger's white, black or green, is to keep them out, whoever they are. The answer has to be in the grooves. Orin's heard this argument 1,000 times. Why should a radio station spend 25 minutes listening to some guy telling you the life story of the act and talking over the record when you could actually be sitting and listening to that record and some other records? What we try to do is to say, if it's in the grooves, we'll play it. If we think our listeners will like that record, whether it's a hit or it isn't a hit, we'll play it. And if we don't think our listeners will like that record, with many apologies to Zig Zig Sputnik, Sue Pollard and Page and Dixon, then I'm afraid we won't play it. I don't say we're always right, but those are the criteria. We try to stick to them as faithfully as possible. And how we decide what we play depends very much on who we're aiming at and what time of day it is. I'm trying to rush through this as fast as possible. You've got to be very careful your records aren't too loud and aggressive very early in the morning. A breakfast show record, it's a typically Stevie Wonder, George Benson, Randy Crawford. Those are the acts that anybody would be more or less happy. Nobody's going to be that happy about getting up in the morning, particularly if you've got to go out and earn a crust. Or perhaps even more particularly if you haven't got a job to go out to. But there are records that are acceptable to just about everybody, those acts. At lunchtime, as I say, you can make the pace come up a little bit. In the afternoon, kids come out of school, so we want to play the kind of music that they like. We've been playing Whistle for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. We're going to be getting fed up with it soon. But the kids want to hear it, so in the afternoon, from 3 o'clock, 3:30, when they're out of school, that's what we want to play. One of the things you mustn't do is to try to make any decisions about your audience vis-à-vis censorship. Nobody in a radio station has the right to decide that records must not be played. Your audience wants to hear a particular record. You shouldn't set yourself up as an arbiter of what's good, morally speaking. That was a big mistake that Mike Reed and Radio 1 made, and it just made them look really, really silly. So those are current records judged on not just tempo, but on feel, how loud, how well they fit in with the tempo of the day. You've also got to play oldies. Oldies are very, very important. Now, everybody here, I'm sure, has got a favourite record that comes from a time where maybe you had your first kiss. Maybe it might be the birth of your first baby. Maybe it might be the first time somebody they go out with, the first time you passed your driving test, your first fag behind the bike sheds, whatever it was. But there are very particular points in your life between being 14 and say 22, 23 that are really, really important. They never go away. And the oldies that were playing on the radio then are always going to be your oldies. The difficulty when you're programming radio is that you've got an audience, some of which is 16, some of which is 36. So the period in which those important records came varies from person to person. I've got a little segue of 10 tracks here. See if any of them remind you of any time. You all got Tommy James and the Shondells, Mony Mony, Smokey Robinson, T-Rex, Barry White, Chicago, the Commodores, David Bowie, Culture Club, Wham, and Diana Ross. And the Diana Ross isn't a mistake. I know that's number one currently, till Sunday on the network chart at 5 anyway. But it's somebody's oldie. It may not be an oldie to you. Your oldie may come from 84, 82, 80. Those were done in 2-year leaps, you see, the records I just played you. But that Diana Ross record is going to mean everything to a group of people who are at that critical age. So with a radio station, if you just want to target on a particular audience, and we said in the afternoon we're looking to get kids and young people out of school, then you ought not to be playing Rock Around the Clock, because they don't know who the hell Bill Haley was.
Now, I'm involved in specifically the promotion and marketing end of the large record companies, RCA being amongst the top 4 in the UK, maybe throughout the world, I'm not too sure. And I'd actually like to base my speech around your questions, because apart from the actual plugging of records, the actual marketing of putting the singles out, making a marketing plan, deciding what sort of point of sales material, are we going to do posters, are we going to do t-shirts, are we going to give away freebies, are we going to, whatever we're going to do. A lot of it, I think, from your point of view, might be a little bit sort of unnecessary at this stage. So what I'd like to do is maybe help some of you to know how to approach the larger record companies with your demos, with your tapes, know some of the tricks of getting in the door or whatever at some stage. So what I'm going to start to say is right from the beginning about making your demo and actually getting someone to listen to it. So initially, what's actually happening in the marketplace at the moment, it seems, is a lot of bands are now spending a good £200, £300, £400 to make a very, very competent demo. So the minute the A&R guy puts it on his tape and he plays it, he can hear something of quality coming out. It may be just a good production, it may be the song is absolute crap, but he's impressed by the production, he's impressed by the extent of trouble that everyone's gone to get that tape to sound the way it sounds. Unfortunately, if he pulls out the next tape out of the next packet, and it's made on a 4-track demo, and it's basically very rough, and he puts it on the tape, I mean, there really is no hope, to be quite honest. He's going to listen to about 2 minutes of it, and then he's going to switch it off, send you a very nice note back saying, thank you very much, but unfortunately, we find this kind of material unsuitable. So in order to shortcut that for you, I feel it's for me to help you to try and explain the best way of doing it and the best way of getting to these people. So, from the making of the tape, what I would suggest you do is actually make demo, but keep it to either 1 or 2 songs on the demo. Don't fill the tape up with 10 or 20 songs. The guy is not going to listen to more than 3 songs. If he's not impressed with the first 3, the others are not going to get a listen. Okay, so if you've got the first song down, you've decided to go for a second song, go for your strongest material. Play it around to your family, to your friends when it's rough or whatever. Get them to be the deciders of what they think is the good song. And then put that one down, work that one out, arrange it properly, put it down as good as you can possibly afford, and send it into the record companies. Send also with it a small biog of whatever the group is about, or whatever the individual artist is about, and also send a photograph, a good photograph if possible, professionally taken if possible. And also, what they also like to look at is song words. So if you've got some song words that you can send along with the tape, that would also be a good idea. I'm not David Grant, thank you very much, gentleman over in the corner there. Another important factor about sending the tape is actually to call the record company up beforehand. Ask to speak to someone in the A&R department, find out his name, her name, whoever it is, and actually address the tape to someone rather than just sticking it in the post just to the A&R department, because they just go in a pile and just sit there for 3 months on end before someone actually gets round to listening to it. So if you address it to someone specifically, that helps. Okay. The other thing I was going to say is don't call the A&R departments if you've just had a tape back, because they really won't remember who you are from Adam, to be quite honest. The other thing I was going to say is keep a log and send as many tapes out as possible. Keep a log of every company and every person you've sent it to, and wait for the letters to come back, or maybe the good news to come back that they'd like to see you, they'd like you to come in and talk to them or whatever. Also, look around and send it to specific companies that are making inroads into the market that you're aiming for, be it dance, reggae, or whatever. It's no point sending a country and western tape to maybe the pop area of CBS, because the guy won't, he won't really have an idea of that kind of music. So try and look, to the companies that are making inroads into the dance market, be it Virgin, be it RCA, be it CBS again, or whatever. And try and approach it that way. Now, if you have some success, you should get a letter back saying, maybe we'd like to hear some more songs, or maybe you'd like you to come and talk to us about taking this further. In that case, what I suggest you do is all dress up in your best clobber, be on time. He won't be on time, but you be on time, and go in and see him and talk about him. Don't talk about business in the first meeting. Don't try to get into how much he's going to pay you or whatever. Find out what he's thinking in the back of his mind, how he sees you, what sort of market he's looking to put you into, and basically where he's coming from. There's no point, as I say, talking about points, because you won't understand points of contract, which are very tricky, and you won't really know what the current rate of pay is for your particular group or band. I mean, it can range from something like £5,000 in advance to £350,000, depending on how strong the material is. So don't get into that area. Get into that area perhaps when you've got someone who knows a little bit more. Get yourself a manager or representative who will go in and talk about that. Try and confine yourself to the musical aspects of getting a deal. Once you've got the deal, the basis of which is so variable, I really can't touch on that. Obviously, the company will then get behind you in terms of talking to you about marketing budgets and what they'd like to do with you, and how they'd like to put you out on the road and watch you go around and do TV shows and radio shows and interviews. And it is a lot of hard work, because you have to be available basically 24 hours a day at the beck and call of the record company, because they know what they're doing and they know how best to push you, how best to project that image to get it across to the media. I'd like to stop at this point and ask if there's any questions on those particular topics I've touched on.
That when the group goes in to talk with the person about a deal, that you don't go in first of talking business. Well, okay, you find out what they're thinking about you and where they're going to put you. But that you send in a manager or somebody to represent you, because the people you're presuming aren't going to know about points or what is a good deal, etc., etc. So I mean, this is what the Black Music Fair is supposed to be about. So if you could explain about points, what points means, how you can recognise a good deal or not, because if the group don't understand it and they send somebody in there...
Okay. The book, the music business book, tells you all about that.
Okay, but I mean, aside from that, if you could just briefly, because I mean, if the group don't know anything about it, or the individual, they've got somebody in there representing them, that person could be ripping them off. And coming back and saying, well, I've got you this, and they think, great, you know, it's a deal. They don't know whether it's good or bad. So.
Okay. Now, basically, what it is, if you imagine 100% of anything, a points deal is split in that you get a percentage of that 100% for your artistic quality, your artistic merit. Generally, that ranges between anything from about 6 points, which Streetway pay you, to 18 points, which someone like CBS might pay you. And then, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, that is the sort of range. Michael Jackson's on a bit more, but he was Michael Jackson. In terms of monies, again, if you go to a smaller company, the advance they might pay you wouldn't be that large, maybe something in the region of £5,000. What you should actually base it on is if they're making you a yearly deal, you should actually work out how much money you need to live on in that year. So the money they give you should actually be a wage, because all the other recording costs that make up the deal are actually footed by the record company. They actually pay the recording costs initially before it's recouped out of your money, the money you make from selling the records. So what you should work out is how much money you need to live on per year, and then that should be the basis of the deal for the first year. Again, climbing in the second year and the third year if they decide to take the option and keep you on.
There's one bad thing about the music business. It's very stupid, and my manager has been trying to fight this for years. The standard is the publisher gets 6.25% of the record as standard, right across the board. That's a rule for all companies. But the artist gets whatever the company says. If the artist is desperate and he's so desperate to get a deal, he will sign anything. The company can say, okay, I'm putting on 0.5%, and you'll sign it. Now, there's no standard body that makes sure that there's a standard rule. I think there should be a standard. There should be like maybe 10, 15% that goes to the artist all the time, irrelevant to who he is. But that way, if you're Michael Jackson, because you're selling so much, you're making a fortune anyway. And if you're a smaller artist, you're still making, you're not in a position where you're getting like 3 or 4 points, or even 2 points, which is actually crooked. And because you're not big enough to make a fuss, you just sign it and you're stuck making peanuts and the company making a fortune off you. There should be a standard, but there isn't. That's why there's from 3% up to 25% they can get. It depends on how much muscle they got and who they are, which I think is a bit stupid.